There are moments in life when you're bleeding out, literally, and you discover the shocking truth about who will actually show up for you. I'm Rachel Mitchell, and 3 years ago, at 29 years old, I learned that the people who gave me life valued a golf game more than my survival. I couldn't believe it when it was happening. The phone call where I begged my parents to watch my twins during emergency surgery, the casual dismissal, the sound of my mother choosing my golden child brother over her dying daughter. But what came next exposed a betrayal so much deeper than that single moment of abandonment. What they didn't know, what I didn't fully know until I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a hemorrhagic miscarriage, was that I'd been funding their entire lifestyle for 6 years. $200 every single month. $400 total. The truth revealed itself in the worst possible moment, and suddenly everything made sense. Why they kept me at arm's length but always close enough to extract resources. Why my brother's achievements always mattered more. Why I was always too dramatic whenever I needed actual support. I'd been cheated, lied to, and financially exploited by the people who were supposed to protect me. But here's what nobody tells you about family betrayal. Sometimes the universe catches them. Sometimes your mother-in-law becomes more of a mother than your own mother ever was. Sometimes the moment you stop funding their country club lifestyle is the exact moment they reveal who they really are by suing you for emotional distress. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't what you do to them, it's what you build without them. What happened next changed everything about how I understood love, loyalty, and what family actually means. Then I discovered that cutting off toxic people isn't loss. It's liberation. I was 12 weeks pregnant when the bleeding started. It wasn't just spotting. It was a hemorrhage, the kind that makes your hands shake and your vision blur because you know something's terribly wrong. I called my mom first, voice cracking, begging her to come watch my almost 3-year-old twins while I got to the hospital. Her response? "Sweetheart, we can't. Your brother Michael's got his championship golf tournament this weekend, and you know how important this is for him." The truth hit me harder than the cramping in my abdomen. I was never the priority, never the one they'd drop everything for. My dad got on the phone, and I thought maybe he'd be different. Maybe he'd see the urgency in my breaking voice. "Rachel, you're always so dramatic about these things," he said, like I was faking a medical emergency for attention. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Their daughter was hemorrhaging, possibly losing a baby, and they were choosing a golf game over their grandchildren's safety. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I was feeling. I'd spent 29 years trying to earn their love, and in that moment, bleeding and terrified, I finally saw the shocking reality. I never would. I hung up and called 911 with trembling fingers, then frantically searched for emergency childcare services, while contractions of pain rolled through my body. The paramedics arrived to find me on the bathroom floor, my white tile stained red, my twins crying in the living room because Mommy wouldn't come out. Backstabbed by the people who were supposed to protect me, I was facing the scariest moment of my life completely alone. The EMT's eyes were full of sympathy when I explained that, no, there was no family coming. No, I didn't have anyone to watch my children. A stranger, a kind woman from the emergency childcare service, arrived within 20 minutes and scooped up my confused babies while I was loaded into the ambulance. She didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, yet she showed more maternal instinct in 5 minutes than my own mother had shown in years. The humiliation of that moment still burns, that I had to pay someone to care because my own parents couldn't be bothered. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens wailed, something inside me broke that had nothing to do with my pregnancy. The ER doctor's face was grave as he explained I needed emergency surgery to stop the bleeding and likely wouldn't keep the baby. I signed the consent forms alone, my hand shaking so badly the signature barely looked like mine. The nurse asked if I wanted to call anyone, and I just shook my head. Who was there to call? My husband was on a business trip 3 states away, scrambling to get a flight back. The family drama playing in my head was almost worse than the physical trauma. Every birthday they'd missed, every milestone they'd dismissed, every time Michael's achievements had overshadowed my existence. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Let us know how it goes. We'll visit next week after the tournament." The sheer audacity of it, the complete lack of awareness about what they'd just done, made something click into place in my foggy, pre-anesthesia brain. This wasn't just about today. This was a pattern, a lifetime of being the daughter who didn't matter. And as the anesthesia pulled me under, I realized that this crisis was about to expose something far bigger than I'd ever imagined. I woke up in recovery to the news that I'd lost the baby and nearly lost my life. The hemorrhage had been severe enough to require a transfusion. The physical pain was manageable with medication, but the emotional wound was raw and gaping. My phone had 17 missed calls, but not one from my parents. Michael had called once, probably obligated by Mom, leaving a message that said, "Hey, sis, heard you had some complications. Hope you're okay. Catch you later." The casual dismissiveness of it, like I'd had a minor inconvenience instead of a tragedy, made me want to throw the phone across the room. My husband Daniel burst through the door around midnight, his face pale with worry and guilt for not being there. He'd caught the first flight he could, but the damage was already done. I'd faced the worst alone. When I told him about my parents' refusal to help, about their choice to prioritize a golf tournament over our family's crisis, his jaw literally dropped. "They said what?" he kept repeating, like he couldn't process the level of betrayal. I watched the realization wash over him that my family wasn't just distant. They were actively negligent and had been for years. The hospital social worker came by the next morning, concerned about my support system. I lied through my teeth, said everything was fine, because admitting the truth felt too shameful. How do you explain to a stranger that your parents don't love you enough to show up when you're dying? That you've always known you were second best, but had spent 3 decades pretending it didn't hurt? The woman looked at me with kind, knowing eyes, like she could see right through my performance, and handed me a card for a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Daniel stayed by my bedside, holding my hand, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "How long has it been like this?" he asked quietly. I wanted to say always, but instead I started listing examples. The graduations they'd missed because of Michael's games, the wedding planning they'd barely participated in because they were renovating Michael's first house, the birth of the twins where they'd shown up 3 days late. Each memory was like pulling back a curtain on a relationship I'd been pretending was normal. The shocking part wasn't that they didn't love me. It was that I'd spent so long accepting it. As I lay there in that sterile hospital room, something shifted in my chest. The physical recovery would take weeks, but I could feel something else beginning. A kind of emotional reckoning I'd been avoiding my whole life. Daniel suggested calling his mother Patricia in Florida, and I almost said no out of habit, not wanting to be a burden. But then I thought about my own mother, probably celebrating Michael's tournament win right now, and I nodded. Maybe it was time to see what real maternal care actually looked like. What I didn't know yet was that Patricia's arrival would crack open a secret I'd been keeping even from myself, one that would transform this personal tragedy into something else entirely. A truth about money, manipulation, and the real cost of trying to buy love from people incapable of giving it. Patricia arrived the next afternoon like a force of nature, efficient, warm, and immediately taking charge in a way that made me want to cry. She brought homemade soup, clean clothes for Daniel, and flowers for my room, then sat down and held my hand while I told her everything. Her face darkened as I explained my parents' refusal, and when I got to the part about the golf tournament, she actually stood up and started pacing. "That is unacceptable," she said firmly. And I realized I'd never had anyone validate my pain like that before. My family had always made me feel like I was overreacting. While Patricia went to get coffee, I pulled out my phone to check on the twins with the childcare service and accidentally opened my banking app instead. My hands froze on the screen as I stared at my transaction history, something I rarely looked at because Daniel managed investments and bills. But my personal checking account was something I'd set up years ago and barely reviewed. There, like clockwork every month for as long as I could scroll back, was a transfer. $200 to an account labeled Family Support. My heart started racing as I did the math in my hospital bed. We'd been married for 6 years. That was $400 per year. I couldn't breathe. That was $400 total. I sat up so fast the IV pulled painfully in my arm. Daniel came rushing over, but I couldn't speak, could only show him the phone with shaking hands. His face went from confused to shocked to absolutely furious in the span of 10 seconds. "Rachel, what is this?" he asked, his voice tight. I didn't know. I genuinely had no memory of setting up these transfers. Then it hit me like a physical blow. My mother had asked me to help them with their mortgage temporarily right after our wedding. Said they were struggling. She'd set up the automatic transfer herself. Said it would be easier, that it was just for a few months. That was 72 months ago. 72 months of my money, our money, funding my parents' lifestyle while they treated me like an afterthought. The infidelity of it, the financial cheating, made me physically ill. I'd been sending them more than most people's mortgage payments for 6 years, and they couldn't even skip one golf tournament to help me in a medical emergency. Daniel was already on his phone, pulling up our full financial records, his face getting redder by the minute. "Rachel, this is $250,000, he said, his voice shaking. "We could have bought a bigger house. We could have—" He stopped, looking at me with something between pity and anger. Patricia came back with coffee and immediately sensed the shift in the room. When we told her, she went completely still in a way that was somehow more frightening than yelling. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, her voice ice cold. "They've been taking $38,000 a year from you, and they refused to watch their grandchildren during your medical emergency so they could attend a recreational sporting event." The way she laid it out made it sound even more insane. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, finally seeing the full picture of how completely I'd been used. Daniel was already typing furiously on his phone, pulling up my parents' social media. There was my dad's new Lexus from last year. There was my mother's post about their Bermuda cruise last month. There was Michael's engagement party at the country club, the one they'd flown to California for while missing the twins' 3rd birthday. Every luxury, every vacation, every extravagance, funded by money they'd guilt-tripped out of me and then made me feel like I was never doing enough. The karma of this moment, discovering their betrayal while lying in a hospital bed they couldn't be bothered to visit, felt like the universe finally pulling back the curtain. Patricia's eyes were sharp as she looked at me, and I could see her making calculations of her own. "Rachel, honey," she said carefully, "I think it's time we had a conversation about what happens next. Because this," she gestured to the phone, to the hospital room, to all of it, "this ends now." And I realized that my medical crisis had accidentally revealed a financial exploitation that was about to change everything. Patricia transformed from a concerned mother-in-law into a protective warrior in the span of about 30 seconds. She pulled up a chair, opened her laptop, and started taking notes like she was preparing for battle. "First things first," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We're documenting everything. The phone calls, the messages, the financial records, all of it." She looked at me with such fierce compassion that I started crying all over again, because this was what a mother was supposed to be. Not someone who took your money and gave nothing back, but someone who showed up when you were broken and helped you rebuild. She called the twins' childcare service and told them she was taking over, would be staying in town for as long as needed, and gave them her credit card for any additional expenses. Then she turned to Daniel and said, "Your job is to take care of your wife. My job is to take care of everything else." The dignity with which she handled the situation, treating me not like a burden, but like someone worthy of protection, made me realize how distorted my definition of family had become. A real mother didn't keep a running tab of what you owed her. She just showed up. The next morning, my parents finally called. My mother's voice was cheerful, oblivious, asking how I was feeling and mentioning that Michael had won his tournament. I was too weak to confront her, so Patricia gently took the phone from my hand. "Susan, this is Patricia Chen, Daniel's mother," she said, her voice professional and cold. "I'm calling to inform you that Rachel nearly died 2 days ago from a hemorrhagic miscarriage, underwent emergency surgery, and required a blood transfusion. She's currently recovering in the post-operative recovery unit." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear my mother's voice change, going from shocked to defensive. "We didn't know it was that serious. Rachel always—" Patricia cut her off with the precision of a surgeon. "Rachel called you while hemorrhaging and begging for help with her children, and you chose a golf tournament. There is no version of this where you're not completely in the wrong." I watched Patricia's face remain calm and composed while she delivered what was essentially a verbal destruction. She wasn't yelling, wasn't being dramatic. She was simply stating facts, which somehow made it more devastating. Then Patricia did something that shocked me. She put the phone on speaker. "Susan, Richard, I think you should also know that I've been reviewing Rachel's financial records. It appears you've been receiving $3,200 per month from her for the past 6 years, a total of $230,400. The gasp from my mother was audible throughout the hospital room. Patricia continued, relentless and measured. "So, let me be clear. You've accepted $250,000 from your daughter while treating her like an inconvenience. That ends today." My father tried to sputter something about it being a loan, and Patricia laughed. Actually laughed. "A loan implies eventual repayment, Richard. What you've been doing is called financial exploitation." Patricia handed me back the phone, and for the first time in my life, I had someone standing beside me as I faced my parents. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Patricia's right. The money stops now, and so does my acceptance of being treated like I don't matter." My mother started crying, saying I was being cruel, that family helps family. But for once, I had a real mother figure next to me, squeezing my hand, showing me what actual family support looked like. And it definitely wasn't this. Canceling the automatic transfer felt like removing a tumor I didn't know was killing me. Daniel handled it from my hospital bed, his fingers decisive on his phone screen as he deleted the payment authorization. Within hours, my mother was calling non-stop, 17 missed calls by dinner time. I blocked her number on Patricia's advice, and the immediate relief I felt told me everything I needed to know about how toxic that relationship had become. The payback wasn't just financial, it was emotional sovereignty I should have claimed years ago. My parents showed up at the hospital the next day, but Patricia had already alerted security about potential unwanted visitors. I watched through the window as my mother argued with the security guard, her face red with indignation, gesturing wildly like she was the victim in all this. My father stood behind her looking uncomfortable, probably calculating how they'd replace that $3,200 monthly income. The humiliation they must have felt being turned away by hospital security was nothing compared to the years of shame they'd made me swallow. For once, the consequences were landing on the right people. The calls switched to Michael's number, my brother, the golden child, suddenly very interested in family unity. "Rach, come on, they're our parents," he said when I finally answered, his tone condescending and tired. "Don't you think you're overreacting? It was just a golf tournament." I felt that familiar pull to minimize my pain, to make myself smaller so everyone else could be comfortable. But then I looked at Patricia reading to my twins in the corner, at Daniel sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair so I wouldn't be alone, and I found a new voice. "Michael, they took $230,400 from me and couldn't spare 2 hours to help during a medical emergency. If that sounds reasonable to you, then we have nothing to discuss." 2 weeks after I got home, a legal notice arrived. My parents were suing me for breach of verbal contract and emotional distress, claiming I'd promised to support them and was now reneging maliciously. The sheer audacity of it, the complete lack of self-awareness, would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. They were actually trying to legally force me to continue funding their lifestyle. Daniel found a lawyer within an hour, a woman who specialized in financial elder abuse cases and seemed personally offended by my parents' behavior. "This is going to be very easy," she said after reviewing everything. "They have no case, and they're about to learn a very expensive lesson." Over the following months, the lawsuit fell apart spectacularly. My parents couldn't produce any written agreement, couldn't explain why a loan had never been discussed for repayment, and definitely couldn't justify why they needed $3,200 monthly while posting vacation photos on social media. Their lawyer withdrew from the case after realizing he was defending the indefensible. My lawyer sent them a letter detailing exactly how close they were to me countersuing for financial exploitation and harassment. The revenge I felt wasn't gleeful. It was quiet and resolute, the kind that comes from finally standing up for yourself after a lifetime of being pushed down. My mother made one last attempt, showing up at my house with tears and apologies, saying she'd been a terrible mother and wanted to make amends. But her eyes kept darting to my car, my house, calculating what else she might extract. I stood in the doorway, not letting her in, and said the words I'd been practicing with my therapist. "I forgive you, but I don't trust you, and I don't want you in my life anymore. What you did wasn't love, it was exploitation dressed up as family obligation." She left crying, and I closed the door on 30 years of manipulation. The justice of that moment was mine alone to claim. Recovery wasn't linear, but it was real. Patricia stayed for 6 weeks, helping with the twins, cooking meals, and just being present in a way I'd never experienced from a mother figure. She didn't keep score, didn't make me feel guilty for needing help, didn't treat my trauma like an inconvenience. One night, while folding laundry together, she said something that broke me open. "Rachel, you've been trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. That's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their capacity." I sobbed into a pile of tiny socks, grieving not just the baby I'd lost, but the childhood I'd never really had. Daniel and I started couples therapy to process the financial betrayal together. He admitted he'd noticed the transfers years ago, but assumed I'd told him, and he'd forgotten. We both realized we'd been in a kind of denial about my family's dysfunction. The therapist helped us see how I'd been conditioned to accept crumbs and call it love, how the money had been my desperate attempt to buy approval that was never for sale. Reclaiming our financial stability became symbolic of reclaiming my self-worth. We paid off debt, started saving for the twins' college fund, and I felt physically lighter with each dollar that stayed in our account. 6 months after the miscarriage, I got pregnant again. The fear was overwhelming at first. What if my body failed me again? But Patricia flew up for the first ultrasound, held my hand while we saw the heartbeat, strong and steady. This pregnancy felt different, like my body was finally my own, not carrying the weight of family expectations and unprocessed trauma. When people asked if my parents were excited about another grandchild, I'd simply say, "We're not in contact," and refuse to elaborate. The shocked looks used to bother me. Now they just reminded me how normalized dysfunction had been in my life. The twins started calling Patricia Grandma Patty, and watching her light up at that title healed something deep inside me. This was what grandparenting looked like, showing up for soccer games, video calling to read bedtime stories, sending care packages just because. She never asked for money, never made her love conditional, never compared my kids to someone else's. The family drama I'd grown up with, the constant competition, the favoritism, the scorekeeping, was completely absent. I was learning that family could be chosen, not just endured. I gave birth to a healthy baby girl on a sunny September morning, and the hospital room was full of people who actually loved me. Daniel, Patricia, 2 close friends who'd supported me through everything. No one was missing because of a golf tournament or a more important obligation. As I held my daughter, I realized I was breaking a generational cycle. She would never wonder if she was enough, never send money to emotionally bankrupt people, never settle for breadcrumbs. The self-worth I'd fought so hard to rebuild would be her birthright. My therapist asked me once if I thought I'd ever reconcile with my parents, and I realized the question itself was wrong. I didn't need reconciliation. I needed liberation. I'd spent 3 decades trying to fix a relationship that required my diminishment to function. Building a new life with people who celebrated rather than tolerated me wasn't a backup plan. It was the victory. And as my daughter grasped my finger with her tiny hand, I knew I'd finally chosen the right family. 3 years later, I saw my mother in a grocery store parking lot. She looked older, smaller somehow, and for a split second, I felt that old pull, the conditioned reflex to make her feel better, to minimize my own boundaries to accommodate her comfort. But then I thought about everything I'd built without her. A happy marriage, 3 thriving children, genuine friendships, a career I'd finally pursued because I wasn't funding someone else's life. The woman walking toward me had nothing to do with any of that success. In fact, she'd actively worked against it for years. She called my name and I stopped, not out of obligation but out of choice. A crucial distinction I'd learned in therapy. "Rachel, please, can we just talk?" she asked, and I noticed she didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge, just wanted things to go back to how they were. "What is there to talk about, Mom?" I asked, my voice calm and detached. "You chose a golf tournament over my medical emergency. You took $230,000 from me without a second thought. You sued me when I stopped letting you exploit me. What conversation do you think we need to have?" Her face crumpled, and she played the only card left, the guilt trip. "I'm your mother. Family forgives. Don't you believe in second chances?" And there it was, the manipulation dressed up as virtue, the same tactic that had worked for 3 decades. But I'd learned something crucial. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I could release the anger without inviting the abuse back in. "I do forgive you," I said, surprising us both. "I forgive you for being incapable of loving me the way I needed. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. You're not entitled to my life anymore." She tried to argue, to bargain, to ask about her grandchildren with calculated tears. I saw through every move because I'd spent years in therapy deconstructing exactly these patterns. "My children have a grandmother who shows up for them," I said firmly. "They have Patricia. They don't need someone who only values them as leverage against me." The truth of that statement hung between us, undeniable and final. I watched her realize she'd lost, not in a dramatic showdown, but in the quiet, permanent way that happens when someone finally stops participating in their own mistreatment. As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt free. The vengeance I'd imagined in my hospital bed years ago had transformed into something better: indifference. She couldn't hurt me anymore because I'd stopped giving her power over my emotional landscape. The shocking realization wasn't that she was a narcissist, or that she'd exploited me. It was that I'd survived despite her and was thriving without her. That was the real karma, not her suffering, but my absolute flourishing in her absence. I drove home to my real family, Daniel making dinner with our eldest, Patricia FaceTiming with the twins, our baby girl playing in her bouncer. This was what family actually meant: people who protected you, celebrated you, showed up when it was inconvenient. I'd stopped trying to fix a broken relationship and started building healthy ones. The liberation wasn't in making my parents pay. It was in finally believing I deserved better. And that, more than any revenge, was the justice I'd been seeking all along. So tell me, have you ever had to choose between keeping toxic family members in your life and protecting your own peace? Have you discovered that the people who demanded the most from you were the ones who gave the least? I want to hear your story in the comments below. What would you have done if you were bleeding out and your parents chose a golf tournament over your survival? Have you ever uncovered financial exploitation from family members? And the hardest question, have you found the strength to walk away from people who share your DNA but don't share your values? Drop your experiences below because this community understands something most people don't. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is close the door on people who've proven they'll never cherish what's on the other side. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to finally set themselves free. And if this resonated with you, if you felt that same sick realization that you've been fighting for crumbs from people who have a whole feast they're not sharing, then subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because I'm going to keep sharing these stories. The messy, uncomfortable truths about family betrayal, financial manipulation, and the beautiful, complicated process of rebuilding yourself when the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally proved they never really did. This isn't just drama. It's the reality check that might save you years of pain, thousands of dollars, and the parts of yourself you keep sacrificing for people who wouldn't do the same for you. Hit that subscribe button, join this community of survivors who chose themselves, and let's keep having these conversations that change lives.